beginning Instagram Live, and no one's here yet, so I'll just hang out until people start showing up. But I want to talk about, once people start showing up, I want to talk about possible ways this virus goes away, possible things that could happen in this economy, other things you can do to kind of not take advantage of what's happening, but kind of prepare yourself for whatever the best and worst case scenarios are. So wait for a few more people to show up. But in the meantime, saw something a little interesting on the news. Basically, the New York City Health Department, New York City, unfortunately, tends to be the epicenter or the ground zero of every major disaster in the past 20 or 30 years. So 9/11, it was actually called Ground Zero. And then the financial crisis of 2008, everything was happening right on Wall Street. And so it was kind of the ground zero of that. And now with this coronavirus, because I guess this is the most densely packed city in the U.S., here we are in New York City with the most number of cases and the most deaths of any other city in the U.S. And it's kind of unfortunate that New York City just keeps doing this. I'm getting a little tired of living at ground zero. But, you know, right now, as of last night, New York City was in a mostly complete lockdown. Like, all the businesses are closed. And if you go to Times Square right now, there's nobody there. But please feel free to post questions or tweet questions to me and I'll answer them. But first, I want to show you, I don't know if you can see this. This is New York City's guidance about sex and the coronavirus disease. I don't know if you could read this discussion of what happens, how rimming, mouth on anus, might spread COVID-19. Virus in feces might enter your mouth, so be careful. Let me see. I'm going to reset this back up. Hold on. I can't figure out how to get rid of okay, there you go. So that's, oops. Oh, I've messed everything up. Okay, here we are, back. Feel free to ask any questions, but I want to go over what might be some good news recently. For one thing, this was discussed a little bit in these press conferences that the president's been happening, but it's kind of downplayed. But apparently there's this French study that shows a combination of hydroxychloroquine and Z-Pak are effective in treating COVID-19 patients. And Trump started talking about it, but for whatever reason, the FDA hasn't yet looked at this. I think we kind of need to start talking about getting rid of the FDA during this crisis. Because if you're really worried, truly worried about overloading the healthcare system, and meanwhile most of the people being affected, at least fatally, by this virus are elderly people with pre-existing conditions, so their lifespans are not that, you don't foresee another 50 years of life for these people anyway. Start giving them the pills and the treatments that seem to be working all around the world. So I know various companies have offered to donate tens of millions of tablets of chloroquine, which seem to have some ability to help. And I don't know, can someone say something if this is live? I'm not even sure if this is totally live. Anybody say anything? Say hello if this is live. Nope. It says, though, some people are watching. Live? Anybody? Okay, more good news. It does also seem to be the case that warmer weather, I know this has been kind of made fun of and people have gone back and forth on this, but it does seem to be the case that warmer weather will slow the transmission of the virus. The virus loves cold, dry weather and hates hot, humid weather. And people tell me, well, what about Singapore? They had the virus. Yeah, they had 2 deaths in the entire country. South Korea, 94 deaths in the entire country. And obviously every death is tragic, and it's not like deaths are good news, but clearly it doesn't seem like this is, it does seem like as this disease goes into the warmer temperatures, it could have an effect. That's one way. Somebody was telling me yesterday this virus could last for 18 months, but I don't believe that's true. I think the virus, there's a combination of things that could destroy this virus. Finally, some questions. What I was saying was, first piece of good news is that a French study shows that hydroxychloroquine could actually help this disease. So my question is, why don't they just give this to everybody? So they're probably going to start giving some sort of pill, I think chloroquine, to every patient. Hopefully they just hand it out to patients or anybody who's a prospective patient, anyone who could possibly be sick. I'm just curious, how many of you, just seeing from the comments, how many of you know anybody who has coronavirus? So wave if you know someone who has coronavirus. And I would say at this point now, I personally know about 8 people who either have had it or will or have it currently, and nobody seems to be hospitalized. No, so Michael Deathless, hello, you know 2 people. No one seems to be hospitalized. I would say from all the people I know, and their ages range from 69 to about 30. Here's the average symptoms that I know from all the people who have, the few people I know, the 8 people I know who have coronavirus. They have shortness of breath. They basically have a cold with a little bit more fever, more coughing than sneezing, and shortness of breath is the biggest symptom. And one way you could avoid going to the ICU is and they sell them on Amazon, you can get an oxygen saturation meter, and it'll tell you what levels are important and what levels are critical. But between things like Tylenol and an oxygen saturation meter, you can basically moderate your own symptoms and determine if you need further help. You don't want to overflow, obviously, the ICU or the hospitals or whatever. And then you kind of have to look at what are the other casualties of everybody being on red alert and shutting down everything. It's not necessarily the case because these hospitals are expecting to get overflowed. People are missing cancer treatments. Other procedures like dental procedures are being canceled or put off. And I think, by the way, it's worth noting that of the people who have symptoms similar to coronavirus, they go in for a test and something like 8 out of 10 of them or 7 out of 10 of them don't have coronavirus. So there are other viruses and colds going around. In fact, this is another piece of news that's interesting. There's other coronaviruses other than COVID-19. There's a coronavirus that was around from 1993 to about 2008 that probably did affect or kill hundreds of thousands of people, maybe millions of people, and affected the elderly. But we never did anything about that. And the question is, why are we so obsessed with this disease that killed 3,000 people in China out of a population of 1.3 billion? So far, there's, 1,700 deaths in the U.S. So here's a question. Do you think people who got affected but don't know and recover, there's probably, for all we know, there are millions of people who have gotten infected, didn't know, and then fully recovered. That's one of the things we only find out afterwards, which is why when everyone says, like the WHO said there's a 3.4% fatality rate, that is so ridiculous because we don't actually know. So everyone says to me, when I say the Chinese numbers, there's 3,000 deaths, there's 80,000 cases, everyone says those numbers have to be wrong. So what if they're wrong? Let's say they're multiplied by 30. It's still an inconsequential amount. In China, 25,000 people a day die. And that's horrible. All 25,000 deaths are tragic, but that's every single day. This coronavirus in China, they claim it killed 3,200 people. By the way, I have asked this question to lots of doctors, specialists, and even government officials. Everyone seems to believe China's number, but let's say they're wrong. Let's say multiply it by 10, multiply it by 20. It's still insignificant compared to the number of deaths that even happened in China during this time. Also, let's look at Italy. So by the way, one of the pieces of good news today, very important piece of good news today, is that Italy's number of deaths related to the virus dropped by 15% day over day. Now it's only one day, but previously Italy had been going up every day, and now hopefully it's stabilizing after about a week or so of severe lockdown. Hopefully the same thing will happen here. Is Chinese food infected with coronavirus? No, not at all. The body count does not impress. I'm not sure what you mean by that. So my point is, we're at that point where we've done social distancing for a week. By the way, it's really unclear if social distancing helps at all. The one thing we know really helps is washing your hands frequently. It's not clear if social distancing, unless you lock yourself in a closet, it's not clear if social distancing does anything at all. So for instance, South Korea, which only had 94 cases of this, they did not shut down their economy at all. They did not shut down a single restaurant, bar, retail store. They did mild social distancing. They quarantined positive cases in their family, but they did not affect their economy as much as we are. So let's talk about the economy. So the economy right now in New York City, every single store and restaurant and bar is shut down. And so the question is, are they going to survive? Are all of these businesses going to go out of business? And just to put it in perspective, let's look at some numbers. And I'll talk about the stimulus bill in a second. Let's look at some numbers. The average American has only $400 in savings in the bank. And that's a horrible thing. So this week, there's probably going to be up to 4 million new applications for unemployment insurance. 4 million people who lost their job in just the past 2 weeks. Now, what does this mean for stores? Are stores going to survive? The average restaurant has only 16 days of cash in the bank. That's just one payroll period. That's not even one period to pay rent. And so yes, if this lockdown, quarantine, whatever you want to call it, if this lasts for more than 2 weeks, then essentially almost every restaurant in the United States that's not part of a chain will go out of business. Every bar will go out of business. Most retail stores will go out of business. The economy is going to be a shitstorm there's just no way to sugarcoat it. Like, the economy is going to be a shitstorm if these lockdowns and social distancing continue. And by the way, I'm in favor of social distancing anyway. Like, if you don't have to be in a crowd of people, don't be in a crowd of people. So I'm going to talk about solutions in a second. And you're right, over 50% of Americans have no emergency fund. By the way, again, most businesses have no emergency fund. I'll repeat it again. The average restaurant right now has only 16 days of cash in the bank. And now there's all sorts of things, and we'll talk about the federal stimulus in a second. But I think we need to start thinking about, and it's hard to put pressure on a government. It's hard to have your voice be heard. But I do think we need to try to find an alternative strategy, because you can't have an economy. The economy is not a light switch. You can't turn off the economy for 3 months and then just turn on it again and everyone goes back to work and everyone goes back to shopping. That's not how an economy works. An economy exists not as a tool of the government, but as a way to keep society going. And if you shut down the economy, you shut down society. If you kill the economy, you kill an entire society. And that's the risk. We're looking at numbers that are potentially much more disastrous than the Great Depression. And So what's a solution? A solution is, well, quarantine everybody who tests positive, and we're starting to get, millions of tests are starting to hit the hospitals this week, and we'll see if we can start using them more quickly. Give every single patient and everybody who has symptoms, give them chloroquine, which seems to have some research that suggests it might have application to coronavirus. Get rid of all potential malpractice lawsuits. Get rid of the FDA. Don't require the FDA to approve testing or chloroquine or anything else that seems to work in other countries. Someone said Trump just tweeted that you can't let the cure be worse than the disease. I think Trump sort of got swept up in the mania of this. Let me give you like a little bit of a math lesson, and this is going to be good news. Whenever I say, if you were to go on Twitter right now and you were to say, what's the big deal? People are going to respond to you and say, well, this is going up 30% a day. This is doubling in deaths every 3 days. And so if I ask the question, show me a single country where this happened, nobody has any answers. Because let's do a simple math lesson here. Everyone says exponential growth and eventually everybody's infected. That's not how exponential growth works in a bounded environment. So we're bounded by the population of the planet. You can't have straight up growth until it finally infects everybody in the planet for many reasons. For one thing, the pandemic itself has a lifespan. It eventually weakens and dies out, most likely when we hit warmer temperatures, just like the common cold, which is also a coronavirus, just like the common cold tends to die out, just like the flu tends to die out, just like many, many, many coronaviruses, including SARS, MERS, and so on, died out after 3 or 4 months. This coronavirus is going to die out. If you look at the latitude on the globe where the coronavirus hit the worst, Italy, Wuhan, the US, it's all in the same latitude, more or less. And the virus loves cold, dry weather. It hates hot and humid weather. If you listen to my podcast this morning with Dr. David Sinclair, he talks about this specifically. I'll just also mention a couple other things he spoke about. So one thing is that, I think also it's important to realize, before I get into that, it's important to realize if you look at a place like South Korea, everyone's saying, 3.4% fatality rate. Well, what if just 1% of the U.S. died? South Korea had a 0.00024% fatality rate. That's hardly, that's not more deaths than they would have normally had. Same thing in Italy, by the way. Their actual number of deaths in the entire country did not really change statistically from last year. So Italy, I don't know if you call this good news, but 99% of the deaths were with people. The average age of a fatality from coronavirus in Italy was 79.5. The average life expectancy of someone in Italy is 80. So again, coronavirus did not change at all. It's not like there was a spike in deaths in the entire country. There was deaths, which is tragic. But now even it looks like their numbers are starting to stabilize after a couple of weeks of lockdown. But we don't even know if the lockdown has anything to do with it. So someone's asking, why are we freaking out about this particular virus? I think we're freaking out about it because several reasons. One is when the virus first came out, I don't know if you remember, but there were rumors that it was a military-created virus with HIV in it. The virus looked strangely like HIV. All of that initial research is completely false, was completely debunked. Everyone took it out. And then, of course, the WHO, like they've done, they did it with SARS, they did it with H1N1, they declared this thing a pandemic that could kill hundreds of millions of people. They've always been wrong. They've never been correct about any virus or disease. So why would they expect to be correct now? We had fears about Ebola. We had fears about Zika. We were scared about swine flu and H1N1. The market fell from that. We were scared about SARS. All of these diseases went away. coronavirus, it's still unclear if this has a fatality rate greater than the flu. So it's very unclear. If you look at the data from the cruise ship and map it to the demographic, in the cruise ship, something like 0.2% of all the people exposed ended up dying. And don't forget, the cruise ship was filled with 100% of the people had a pre-existing condition. They were all elderly or obese people. So it's even that data is skewed compared to the population of the U.S. My guess is in the U.S. we're going to have something like, instead of a 0.1% like the flu death rate, we'll probably have something like a 0.001% death rate or less. We're not going to have 150 million cases like they say. We're not going to have 500,000 deaths like they're claiming. We're going to have probably less than 10 to 20,000 deaths. And the price for that is that they're shutting down the economy. Again, and I'll go over the stimulus in a second, but the average restaurant has 16 days of cash in the bank. So you can't shut them down for 2 weeks, or they're just gonna go out of business. And restaurants sort of represent kind of the average small business in the U.S. So, again, good news is that Italy, the number of new cases of deaths seems to be going down right now. At least, we've seen that in the past few days. We also have seen treatments that potentially work. There's also a lot of data to suggest that as temperatures get warmer, the disease transmission can slow down. Not necessarily go away, but slow down. The other thing I want to mention is that at this point now, being in New York City, you start to know people who have coronavirus. And so I know about 8 people who have all the same symptoms: high fever, cough, severe shortness of breath. They all have either gotten over it, including a friend of mine who's 69 years old. They all have either gotten over it or they are getting over it, and they're just keeping track of their symptoms and their oxygen and so on. So now let's talk about the economy. So someone says we'll be locked down for a month. I don't think we're going to be locked down for a month. And the reason is because the economy will collapse. So let's say you have 10,000 deaths in the U.S. from coronavirus in total, but you end up with 20 million unemployed people. 20 million unemployed, you're going to have many more suicides, homicides, violent crimes, other crimes, far more of this than any effects from coronavirus. Someone asked, will there be a second wave of coronavirus? Of course there will. There's going to be a second wave. There's going to be a third wave. There's going to be next year. But by then, we'll have cures. We'll potentially have vaccine. Yes, it takes 18 months for the FDA to approve a vaccine. So screw the FDA. We need to get the FDA out of this process and just start handing people medicine that is being shown to work. Like in France, there was a study that hydroxychloroquine and Z-Pak working together cured 100% of the people who were infected with coronavirus. So there are potential cures. We just need to make sure the FDA is not in the way of just giving these cures to everyone who tests positive while those people are quarantining. Meanwhile, what's going to happen is you've got to reopen. This is my prediction. If it doesn't happen this week, it'll happen by the end of next week at the latest. You have to reopen the economy. The economy isn't just here for us to go to Disneyland. The economy feeds people. The economy gives people jobs. The economy creates innovations, solves problems. People need a paycheck to live. We're a capitalist society. The problems with the opposite, a communist society, is that those societies don't survive. Russia was a communist society. The Soviet Union was a communist society. It didn't survive. Cuba hasn't really survived. Other fascist or authoritarian societies don't survive. So the U.S. is going to be forced to open the economy. No matter what we say, no matter what the doctors say at this point, at some point, the economy is going to have more importance than any worst case scenario with the coronavirus. And people saying business are adjusting, local restaurants are delivering. Let me tell you something. I run a local bar. I am a small business owner in New York City, and I know many of the other owners of small businesses in New York City. Delivery does not solve restaurants' problems. Delivery is 10% of the revenues, but you still have almost all the costs. You still have the employee cost of cooking the food. You have the cost of your delivery guys. You have the cost of keeping the kitchen open. You have the cost of rent. So just the fact restaurants actually can't even afford to keep the delivery option open because the cost of cooking the food is greater than the money. You have a 5% margin on delivering. I used to run a delivery service for food. You have like a 1 to 5% margin in that business. You can't afford all the costs of the employees and the chefs and the cooks and so on. So this is an important question. Someone asked, do you think it's a good time to take cash out of your property? And the answer is yes, because for one thing, interest rates are almost 0%. So you might as well borrow as much money as you can because interest rates are 0%. Second, I feel cash is king. If the economy goes into a worst case scenario, you're going to be happier you have cash than other assets. So I would rather, so for instance, I'll give you an example. I always pay this is information. I always pay my rent a year in advance. So I pay 12 months worth of my rent. I just paid a year's worth of my rent in advance. And the way I did it was by immediately borrowing it off of stocks that I own. Why not? Why wouldn't I borrow at 0% interest or almost 0% interest and just conserving my cash? You want to conserve. Look at this negative statistic, right? The average American has $400 worth of cash. That's really sad and tragic. And I am personally worried about the tragedy that's going to happen in this economy if we don't reverse these lockdowns, these quarantines, these very restrictive measures in California, in Ohio, in New York, in other states. The housing market's going to get destroyed because, I was talking to someone today and they were telling me like, I don't have to pay rent anymore. And I'm like, why would you not pay rent? You have the money to pay rent. And she said to me, oh, no, I don't. They said we don't have to pay rent anymore. And I'm like, well, what about your landlord? And she said, he probably doesn't have to pay rent either. And I'm like, well, no, what if your landlord makes his living from your rent? Or what if your landlord has to pay rent for whatever reason? Don't think that just because you don't have to pay rent, it's not hurting people or you could take advantage of it. Like, an economy is supposed to move forward, not rely on gifts and handouts and so on. That said, this federal stimulus is very important. Okay, what's worse, having coronavirus or the smell of my underwear after a week in quarantine? I can guarantee you the smell is worse. The great thing about this quarantine is that while I've been washing my hands, the rest of hygiene, who cares? I'm not seeing anybody. I don't care. But, the other thing is, and I mentioned this earlier, but for new people, and then I'm going to talk about the economy in a second and what we can do. But New York City issued this guidance called, I'm looking at it now, Sex and Coronavirus Disease 2019 from New York City Health Department. And this is the weirdest instructions I've ever seen. So it basically says don't do rimming, which is mouth on anus, because virus in the feces might enter your mouth. I think that's a little too much information from New York City. Now, someone said, how did you borrow against your stock holdings? You just call your bank and you're allowed to borrow up to 50%. In some cases, you're about only 30%. But depending on the stock, you could borrow between 30 and 50% off of your stocks. And if you have a margin account. So I do recommend having as much cash in the bank as possible, but I'm not selling anything though. I don't want to sell anything because the market's more than 33% down. The economy would have to go down more than 33% and then stop growing from there. The economy would have to go down about 50% to make the stock market right now fair. So the stock market to me right now is a bargain, but very important lesson. I'm not selling, but I'm not buying anything either. You don't want to make decisions inside a market where everybody is panicking. Now, I know people give the advice, always buy when there's blood in the streets, but that's not advice that is very easy to follow. The best thing you can do is wait and do nothing. We don't know what's going to happen. There's a big difference between if this lockdown lasts another month versus if this lockdown lasts another week. So we don't really know the data of what's happening. So, and I've been repeating this for the past 2 weeks actually, and the market's gone down like another 20% or so. So I don't know if the market's going down further or if it's going up, but I don't like it when there's so much volatility. When you go from 3% down to 3% up, from 10% down, and then the next day's 10% up, even up days are bad if they're too volatile. So I'm waiting until there's more data and until the volatility is down. Now the good thing is, so someone's in Spain and they'll lock us, and he says they'll lock us down for 1 month. Bye economy. But we don't see the solution. The solution is there's no evidence that quarantining an entire society helps this virus. South Korea, look at Singapore. Two deaths in the entire country of Singapore. All the restaurants stayed open. All businesses stayed open. South Korea, 94 deaths. I don't know how many people live there, like 40 million people. 94 deaths out of 40 million people. They did not close the economy. They did not close restaurants, bars, stores. So here's what I think is going to happen. First off, we're going to pass this stimulus bill. Now, right now it's overly politicized. It doesn't matter whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. Let's just look at it from like a game point of view. The Democrats Trump wants to win re-election. The Democrats don't want him to win re-election. Obviously, that's the rules of the game. And the Democrats are afraid that if they pass this stimulus bill, that the Republicans will easily be reelected. That may or may not be true. I don't know. But I think we need to stop politicizing, the 100 million people who work in this economy, the 28 million small businesses in this economy, the millions of restaurants. Again, the average restaurant has 16 days of cash in the bank during good times. So those restaurants are already out of business. I'm a small business owner in New York City, and again, I said this earlier, many restaurants and my peers in the restaurant and bar industry, they're out of business already. They have fired all their employees already. So that sort of suggests, A, the stimulus bill is going to get passed in one form or the other. People are saying, they're just bailing out big businesses. That's not true. They're including an immediate universal basic income, which I strongly supported when Andrew Yang was running for president. That's in the stimulus bill. Also part of the stimulus bill is various emergency funds for the Federal Reserve to start buying everything from bonds to maybe even stocks. I do suspect that the Federal Reserve will start buying stocks once this is all settled. There's going to be provisions in the stimulus bill for small businesses to take out very, very necessary loans. How will restaurants make payroll next week if they don't have access to loans? There's no point in moving interest rates to zero if nobody's allowed to borrow money. So you're going to have to ease the ways in which small businesses can borrow money. That's going to happen in the stimulus bill that's being proposed. So my guess is, because nobody actually wants to, and I feel like we're sort of prisoners of these billionaires. So obviously Trump's a billionaire and many of the people working for him, but Nancy Pelosi is a billionaire or 100 millionaire. All of these people do not care about the actual economy. They want to be reelected. So my guess is, though, there's going to be enough pressure in everybody's districts that we're going to have to pass a stimulus bill, which is a good thing. And here's the thing. The economy is a $15 trillion economy. If we pass a $2 trillion stimulus bill and the Fed plays with another $4 or $5 billion in stimulus, that is going to be such an enormous surge on the economy that by the end of this year, I don't even care what happens next quarter. Clearly, next quarter is screwed up. It's not going to be a pleasant quarter in terms of economic data. But there's going to be so much stimulus hitting the economy in starting around August or September and continuing for the next 12 to 18 months after that, maybe years after that. We're going to all feel wealthy. We're going to feel rich. There's going to be money raining down. Now, there is a problem with that, and this is one thing I've thought about. When is the last time stimulus like that happened? This is much greater than the 2009 stimulus. So it didn't happen in the U.S. The last time I've seen any kind of stimulus like this in history was Germany in the 1920s, when they printed up money to pay back their debt in World War I. So that is not, and then there was hyperinflation, and then of course that led to World War II. But now realistically, there's not going to be hyperinflation in the U.S. First off, we have seen an example of a multi-trillion-dollar stimulus package in the U.S., which was 2009. Not only was there not inflation, but I think there's actually deflation in the economy. First off, oil prices have caved in half. Second off, there's so much anxiety about robotics and automation and things like that. That enhances the productivity of an economy and it reduces inflation because, unfortunately, it reduces employment. Whenever you have a situation where people are unemployed more than usual, you can't have inflation. Inflation doesn't exist because nobody has money to buy things. So and companies don't have so much fixed costs that they have to keep raising prices. So employment is the main factor that determines inflation. So that's a little economics lesson. There's never inflation without full employment. So the danger we were in a few months ago was that we had full employment. That could have led to inflation. But now there is zero chance for inflation. And so we're going to have this stimulus package one way or the other. That's going to be trillions of dollars in the economy. We're not going to have inflation, at least for the next, call it 2 years. So I'm looking at a 2-year window. And by 2022, then Congress and the government's going to have to figure out how to avoid inflation. Okay, so someone said, and this is the same as inflation, someone suggested that if we print all this money, we could have a currency crash. No, because it turns out the dollar has been going up because this is the only safe currency out there. What would you rather have, the dollar or the euro, the dollar or the yen, the dollar or pesos? Of course, you would rather have the US dollar. So currency crash and inflation are the same thing. If the currency crashes, inflation goes up. So inflation is not going to go up because employment is down, is going to be horrible. So there's going to be the stimulus package and there's going to be no inflation at least until 2 years from now. And you can tell when there's going to be inflation. You'll feel a bubble. Like maybe the Dow Jones index might hit 40,000. By the way, it's 18,000 now. If the Dow Jones hits 40,000, let's do an Instagram Live and I'll tell you if I think there's going to be inflation. But what's going to happen is there's going to be so much stimulus. If they stop this lockdown within the next 1-2 weeks and after they pass this stimulus package, we're going to have a stock market that's going to surge so high that I wouldn't be surprised to see Dow 40,000 by the end of 2021. So that's the main issue. Now the question is, here's the worst case scenario. By the way, people are saying the worst case scenario is 150 million infected cases of this coronavirus in the US and 2 million deaths. That is ridiculous. I'm gonna have to hit the next person who says there's gonna be 2 million deaths in the US because of this coronavirus, within the next few months. This is ridiculous and then people will say, oh, but it's doubling every 3 days, so do the math. No, exponential growth does not work like that. Exponential growth on a math homework assignment works like that, but we're not in a classroom. This is the real world. In the real world, you're bounded by so many factors. You're bounded by the fact that there's only a certain number of people on the planet. You're bounded by immunity issues. You're bounded by the fact that some people have better immune systems than others. So what happens is the growth in a bounded environment, okay, this is basic math actually, there's something called the sigmoid curve. So imagine what the typical learning curve. So in a learning curve, when you're learning a new skill, you first don't have the skill at all. Then you have an exponential increase in your knowledge. You're learning something new, and then you hit your limit. Okay, you hit the limit of how much you can learn, and it starts to slow off. Well, exponentially growing epidemics, anything exponential in a bounded environment, and a population bounded environment is a bounded environment. It has the same curve as a learning curve, flat and then spike and then flat. And then maybe down, actually. So what's going to happen with this pandemic is we're in the exponentially rising phase of it, and it's an S curve, and it actually it's called a sigmoid curve. It's called an S curve. What's going to happen with this? And we've seen this in South Korea. We saw this in Wuhan. We're about to see it in Italy. By the way, in Italy, for the first time, yesterday there was 15% fewer new deaths than the day before. That is a good piece of data. very important piece of data because Italy's been in lockdown for 2 weeks, and now we're seeing the results of that lockdown. Actually, they were in lockdown for less than 2 weeks. They were in lockdown from March 9th and March 22nd. We saw the first decline, serious decline in deaths. So again, that's not a trend, but we're starting to see good data from Italy. This week, my guess is, or maybe early next week, I don't know. It's hard to say when we're going to start to see good data in the U.S. because there's so many different clusters in the U.S. But no matter what, the pandemic has a very clear beginning, middle, and end, like any curve, like any exponentially growing phenomenon in a bounded environment. The planet Earth or the United States or New York City is a bounded environment. We're bounded by the number of people. So it's going to look like the same S-curve as a learning curve. And that's important math to remember. So that's important to remember. Economics, it's important to remember that they could print up several $1 trillion, but we're all going to feel rich after that, but we're not going to have inflation until employment gets back to full employment. And that's going to be a while because think about it. What's going to happen? There's not going to be, it's not going to be like they're going to end this lockdown tomorrow and all the restaurants going to open up. No, the damage has been done already. There's going to be 4.5 million new applications for unemployment insurance this week, most likely. Restaurants that only had 16 days worth of cash, like the average restaurant in the United States, they're out of business by now. So the stimulus package is going to help these people, but it's not going to be like business as usual. We're going to take some time to recover. The economy will recover faster than the human beings will recover. And that's the sad thing, is you have people laid off, you have people going through mental anguish and anxiety. And, there's a lot of resources. I've talked about it in the past. How do you deal with anxiety? Go on my Instagram account, and you can see how I deal with anxiety. There's a lot of ways to solve anxiety. Some people will make use of them. Some won't make use of them. But the economy must be saved. And I don't say this as someone who benefits from the economy. The entire society and the economy are linked. Like, all food comes from the economy. All your clothes come from the economy. Your kids get educations from the economy. All your friends work and you get news from the economy. We have a law enforcement as part of the economy. We have healthcare as part of the economy. And you can't just flip off the economy like it's a light switch and then flip it on 3 months later. You won't have an economy to flip on. You won't have a society to flip on 2 months later, 3 months later. So our leaders have to be aware of that. And so I don't expect this lockdown to last more than another week. Because otherwise, instead of having 4.5 million layoffs, which is what we're going to see this week, you're going to have 20 million layoffs. And then you have the breakdown of American society. So now, assuming that the lockdown is going to end within, let's call it 2 weeks at the latest, but hopefully in the next 10 days or less, assuming a multi-trillion-dollar stimulus package, assuming a multi-trillion-dollar stimulus package is passed, then let's discuss investing. First off, rule number one. Okay, someone's asking, what do you think is really going on here? What is really going on? So here, in a nutshell, is what's going on. We have an exponentially growing virus that's going to stop growing exponentially, and it's blown way out of proportion. Yes, it's a exponentially growing coronavirus. There have been many coronaviruses in the past 20 years. So I want to see if I have anything up on my screen. But okay, there was a coronavirus. Just do a Google search with coronavirus. There was a coronavirus called CoV229E. Okay, and that occurred between 1999 and 2003, and it had a case fatality rate of 8% in the elderly. But I didn't even know about it until I started doing this research. So we've had bad coronaviruses. We've had silent pandemics that really affected the elderly and other populations in recent history. But we didn't have this panic of the century. So this has to be, at some point, our leaders will see that this is ridiculous. Like, forgetting even SARS and MERS, we've had hundreds of other coronaviruses it hit this society and hit the globe over the past 30 years. This is not an unusual thing. We'll have 10,000 deaths, 20,000 deaths, which also, by the way, is not unusual in the United States. The United States has on average 7,500 deaths per day. So far over the past 2 months with coronavirus, we've had 1,700 deaths. That's horrible. I personally now know 8 of my friends who have coronavirus. Not a single one of them has symptoms that are more serious than shortness of breath. People are getting over this. In Italy, the average age of a fatality of coronavirus of their, 2,000 deaths or whatever it was, the average age of these people is 79 and a half. The average life expectancy in Italy is 80. So it's not changing their demographic picture at all. So why are we so worried about this? I kind of think it became this political epidemic. First, it became this political epidemic in China. Like we thought there was all this media that they were creating this biological warfare. That all of that was debunked. All of that, there was actual research papers saying there was HIV in the coronavirus, blah, blah, blah. All of that was proven to be false. It's a naturally occurring coronavirus. Second, it's become political in the U.S. Republicans and Democrats fighting over a much needed stimulus bill. You have Nancy Pelosi with several $100 million on one side. You have Trump with billions of dollars on the other side. And, they're all worried about being reelected. So they're having this senseless battle. Assume a stimulus is going to be passed. Assume a lockdown is going to end. People are still going to be affected. Millions of people are going to be out of work. Millions of businesses are going to fall. But there's 28 million small businesses, meaning 28 million businesses make less than something like 10 million in revenues in the U.S. If you let them all, and on average, they have less than a month worth of cash in the bank. If you let them all go out of business, society ends. So let's talk about investing for a quick second. One thing is, don't invest in the middle of a panic. The market is more than a third down from the high. And if the stimulus package passes, you're going to easily see the Dow go to 40,000 or more by the end of 2021. So someone's saying, so this organized panic is really due to the egos of politicians and media and scientists. So you have this kind of trifecta of politicians, journalists who try to scare people, and the healthcare system like the WHO and the CDC that's trying to get funding and trying to show how important they are. Look at the past 20 times the WHO declared a pandemic and it never happened. They said it with H1N1, they said it with SARS. None of these things ever happened. So someone's saying buy the fear, sell the euphoria. That's partly true. I don't think any of us are really good enough at investing to buy the fear. So what I tend to do is, right now we're in a panicky period. Let's say the Dow's at 18,000. Let's say the stimulus bill gets passed. Let's say the lockdown ends. And let's say we get good data about the coronavirus. And then suddenly now the Dow's back to 23. It pops up 20%. It goes to 23,000. There's going to be huge buying opportunities. Oil companies have been shattered. You have companies like Royal Dutch Shell right now paying a 20% dividend. You get 0% in your savings account, but you can get a 20% dividend from Shell. And oil's not going anywhere. Oil, even at $20 a barrel, $25 a barrel, $30 a barrel, Shell is still profitable. Many oil companies are still profitable. So these companies aren't going anywhere. They're going to be huge opportunities for many, many months. You don't have to buy right now when everyone's panicking. There's enough things to worry about than your portfolio. So don't worry so much about investing. But here's where some of the... By the way, let's look at a crazy example. This is how crazy the stock market is right now. Probably many people listening to this use Zoom for video conferencing. Like everybody who's working from home right now uses Zoom. Guess what? There are two companies named Zoom on the stock market. They're both up huge. Huge. One of the Zooms is the real Zoom Technologies. The other Zoom is actually a fake company that is ironically based in Shanghai. It's a company with 0 employees, and its name is Zoom Technologies, and the stock symbol is ZOOM. It's gone from 1 to 14 during this crisis because people think it's the software Zoom. So that is insane. Now, I don't recommend shorting it, even though it's going back to 1 eventually, because whenever something's crazy, it can keep on going crazy. But that shows you how the stock market right now is this just manic train wreck. That doesn't mean you buy the fear now. I personally wait until things stabilize a little bit because I don't like volatility. I like to sleep at night. your opportunities are not going away. 3 months from now, there's going to be great opportunities in the market because of what's happening now. You don't have to try to catch the bottom because we don't know if there's going to be an even worse. If for some reason they don't pass the stimulus package, or if for some reason this lockdown doesn't end, the stock market is going to get closed down a month from now. And I'd rather keep my cash in cash than have it lost in the ether. So I'm for investing. Any strong investor will wait until the panic subsides, because even if you don't catch the bottom, you're certainly not going to miss many opportunities. So how many months of emergency fund you suggest we start having for personal and business? 6 months. So you always want to have, now not everybody has this, right? The average American has $400 in the bank. Now that's because Americans in general don't save, but it's also because a lot of people are underemployed. But if you can, try to have 6 months savings in the bank. Maybe in a crisis situation like this, you kind of want a little bit more. So this is a horrible thing to suggest, but since interest rates are so low, I would look towards mortgaging the house to get extra cash if you can, borrowing off of other assets. Again, not long term, but just during a crisis, it's good to have runway of 6 to 12 months, just in case you have to go somewhere, or just in case there's more layoffs than expected, just in case there's some sort of crisis in your area, you need to get away. Who knows? I mean, it's funny how there are gun lines around the corner in every city. I was talking to a friend of mine about an hour ago, and he said his local gun store opened up on Sunday because there were so many requests from people buying guns, which is scary. Why is that happening? I don't know, but that's a scary statistic. So here's the best way to make money in this solution. So someone says, what's the best way to borrow money? Well, first off, in this stimulus package, there's probably going to be a lot of ways to borrow money. Second off, you can borrow money off of credit cards. Third, you can borrow money off of stocks or other assets that you own. You can borrow money off of your house. For me, I had some stocks. I paid my rent by instead of going from my normal checking account, I went from my brokerage account. I paid my rent by borrowing off the stocks. I don't want to use any cash during this crisis situation right now. An immediate shutdown does not make sense because every day there's new quarantines, new restrictions, new shutdowns, new this, new that. You can't just shut everything down and close your eyes and hope that this virus goes away. You need to do things intelligently instead of just shutting everything down. The economy is not a light switch that you can just turn off for a few months and then turn it back on. But if there's if there's 40 million layoffs or 30 million layoffs, the U.S. government can't just write a check to everyone either, no matter how big the stimulus is. So they're going to have to shut this lockdown down. They're going to have to do this stimulus package one way or the other. They're going to have to kind of hold their breath a little bit in terms of the virus growth. You again, in South Korea, a population of 40 or so million people, 94 deaths. Singapore, 2 deaths. China, 3,000 reported deaths. Okay, multiply it by 30. Let's even say there's 100,000 deaths, although I don't believe that. Let's say there's 3,000 deaths, mostly in the elderly, but still tragic. The similar situation is going to happen in the U.S. We're going to have a tiny percentage of fatalities in the U.S. And people always say, oh no, man, you're missing exponential growth. No, read a math book. There's no such thing as exponential growth in a bounded environment, and we're bounded by our borders and our population and by people's immune systems and so on. Someone says cash is king. I agree with that. Have cash. Don't even invest yet. But if you want to take advantage of this situation, the thing to do is learn new skills. There are many types of remote businesses one can start. Oh, I have a poor connection, and this is going to run out in about 5 minutes. But I'm looking at various websites that look like, there's a site called flippa.com, FLIPPA.com, that sells these small e-commerce websites. Maybe those might be good investments. I'm looking at a variety of different things that could be good investments other than just stocks. But at the moment, I would not What about penny stocks? No way, penny stocks. Do not do anything with penny stocks right now. Why would you do penny stocks when many mainstream stocks are going to go up 1 or 200% after this? You look at like an oil company like Shell has fallen from 66 to 25. You're going to have better, and it has a 20% dividend. So your returns are going to be much better and safer with a company like Shell. The most important thing about investing is how you reduce risk, not how much money you make. If you reduce risk, you'll make a lot of money. If you don't reduce risk, you'll lose money no matter what. Real estate, I'm not touching real estate because look at New York City. New York City used to be the best real estate environment in the world. Everybody left New York City during this crisis, except me for some reason. Everybody went out to the country, and I think real estate's going to have problems for years to come. And also, they're kind of saying, oh, maybe during a crisis like this, you don't have to pay rent. I don't think I want to be a landlord if the government is telling people not to pay rent. Why would I want to own a home and risk that the government is going to tell people not to pay rent? So I'm not real estate. There's going to be the world is going to have a new normal. The world had a new normal after 9/11. The world had a new normal after the financial crisis. People's behavior actually changed. Someone asked, "How's my comedy routine going?" I don't know. I haven't done stand-up. 2 weeks ago today, I was in the Netherlands. I had done 5 cities in a row, 5 cities in 5 days in the Netherlands, and I haven't done any stand-up since then. 2 weeks ago today, I came back from the Netherlands, and I feel like I was the last touring comedian in a foreign country, maybe ever. No Wuhan jokes yet, but I kind of want to visit Wuhan after this is over, and I want to get like a Wuhan lacrosse T-shirt from the University of Wuhan. I think that would be kind of some good merch. But let me see. You lived in Amsterdam. How did you not know? I was at the comedy cafe in Amsterdam, right in the middle of Amsterdam. So I performed in Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Zwolle, and 3 other cities I can't remember the name of. So any other questions? I think they're going to... this is a 60-minute limit, so they're going to shut me down. What are chances of martial law? 0. We're almost in martial law right now. You can get a $10,000 fine in New York City for opening up your nail salon. You'll get a $10,000 fine, which is insane. And the reverse of martial law is going to happen. I would bet you within 14 days or less, and I'm hoping really within 5 days or less, but conservatively, within 14 days or less, there has to be an end to the severe lockdown. South Korea didn't shut down a single business. Singapore didn't shut down a single business. There is no evidence that shutting down businesses leads to less coronavirus cases. Second, they're going to have to pass a stimulus package, which is going to surge the economy. And third, all the data coming from every single country is kind of positive that this pandemic is gonna die off sooner than we think. It doesn't really affect most people. Now, it's sad for the populations it affects, but there have been many, many coronaviruses over the years that have affected the elderly. This is just another one. The elderly should stay indoors. People who have symptoms or who test positive should stay indoors. Practice. People should wash their hands. But other than that, there's no other evidence that anything helps slow the spread of this virus. And it's not going to spread exponentially for more than just a few weeks in every location that it hits. That's just not how math works. So there's sort of a law of large numbers in a bounded world when you have exponential math. And people don't seem to realize this. But what we do know is that if this does get back to a normal economy within the next few weeks, and we have a multi-trillion-dollar stimulus package, this is a fact. You can't fight the Fed. The stock market is it might not be tomorrow, it might not be next week, but the stock market is going to surge by the end of 2021. The Dow will easily be double this, will easily hit 40,000. It has to, because where is $4, $5, $6 trillion going to go? It's going to get spent. And eventually that money, all spent money, finds its way into the stock market or into the bond market. It's the only 2 places where it ends up. So here's an important rule about stimulus. This is really important to pay attention to. If I put $1, if the government puts $1 of stimulus in the economy, it doesn't have a $1 effect. I go and buy a newspaper. The newspaper guy goes to the store and buys potato chips.